it's good to have kids, which forces me to be present and to be with people and to go out and do things. And then when I come home to read my book, I discover, oh, that's so weird. I really relate to this thing the character's going through. This is just like what I did yesterday. Hi, this is Scott Braidman, and you're listening to Expansive Intimacy with Jim Young.
Welcome to Expansive Intimacy. I'm your host, Jim Young, and I'm on a quest to help men like you and me discover how to apply intimacy to unlock new, expansive versions of success in your relationships, your work, and your life. With each episode, we'll take another deep dive into the intimacy toolkit to show you how you can enhance your emotional intelligence, leadership abilities, and relationship skills. So settle in and open up, because it's time to get intimate. Hey everybody, and welcome to Expansive Intimacy. This is Jim Young, your host. And if you've listened to some episodes in the past, you may have heard me describe how I've gone through what I term a midlife rebuild. Rebuilt my whole life starting about 10 years ago. One of the key elements of that rebuild has been learning the gifts of improv comedy. And I remember from some of my classes several years ago, having one of my teachers kind of give me the same feedback every so often when I would jump in with some convoluted idea that I thought was going to be really great, and it would kind of fall flat. And he would say to me, that's a really good idea, Jim, but I think you're being a little bit too complicated with it. You could just simplify it. That guy is Scott Braidman. He is one of my improv teachers. He's the director of my improv troupe. He's the artistic director of Happier Valley Comedy, which is the nonprofit improv comedy theater and training center in Hadley, Massachusetts, where I've learned this wonderful set of skills. And Scott brought so much wisdom to me through those classes and through our ongoing relationship. I'm glad to consider Scott a friend these days. He's also a guy that I just admire a lot. He's a really committed dad to two amazing kids, a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And I also just appreciate that Scott is kind of an unabashed nerd who I think has a stomach that's actually shaped like a burrito, because that's all he eats is burritos. I don't think we get into any burrito talk on the show today, but Scott is my guest for today's episode. We definitely talk about what it's like to be parents in this day and age as dads, and how we can bring some of those gifts from improv comedy into our lives in ways that maybe make it a little bit simpler, something that I'm still working on with his help. And every Saturday night, there's an opportunity for me to go see him on stage, and sometimes he's there supporting me when I'm on stage. And I'm super excited to have him supporting me today in this conversation as we bring him on to the Expansive Intimacy stage. So without further ado, let's bring on Scott Braidman. Scott, my friend, it is so fun to be in this conversation with you that is a little different than the dozens, maybe hundreds of other conversations we've had over the years. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
As you know, from listening to some episodes and also from what we talked about ahead of recording, the first question I always have is, how do you define intimacy?
So I thought about that a lot, and I think my answer is presence. To be fully present with someone feels like intimacy, and it's hard to do. I think if you're fully present, you are in a natural flow state of give and take, and you can't be thinking of what you're going to say next while you're listening, and you can't be throwing up a facade that you want the other person to think a certain way about you that's different than who you actually are. It's true presence, I think, is amazing and challenging to achieve, and I get to practice it a lot with my kids, who are naturally often entirely present, sort of just as their natural way of being, which is enviable.
It is. It's so I missed most of that because I was trying to think of how do I want to respond.
Just like, it really is though. Like the fleeting moments of presence feel so good, which is maybe why kids are so joyful, is because they're just present with their reality day to day, moment to moment. What are some of your beliefs about what pulls us away? Like, why can't we just be childlike and present all the time?
Oh my God. I mean, everything. It's so it seems like so much of life, or I should say adult life, is 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 built around things that pull you away from presence, that you have to be planning for your future. You're expected to be prepared for things that might happen. And that's, questions that that you would be asked in a job interview. You should always know where you're going. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's the next step in your career? How much money do you have in the bank right now? How are you going to make that go up and not down? What happens if insurance, like we're all supposed to have insurance. That's like, I don't know, the opposite of presence maybe is insurance.
Oh my God.
I don't, everything. And that's I'm saying big life things like that, but also down to the minutia, down, like if I'm trying to be present with my kids and I can see that we've left out food on the counter behind them, that's taking me away from being present, because I'm thinking about keeping a clean house, or I'm thinking about not wanting ants, or getting that milk back in the fridge before it spoils. I mean, life is absolutely chock full of things that take you out of presence, and it's a constant, I think, challenge to get back into it. I think some people are better than others. My wife is amazing at it, and I try to follow her example.
What does she do? Does she have particular practices or mindsets, or like how does she end up staying so present from what you see?
I think when I first met her, which was 20, 21 years ago, I was immediately struck, I think, by how the word I always used was genuine. She was entirely genuine. You would know what she was feeling at all times, which is, yeah, can be challenging for her because she can't fake it. I mean, she's better at it now if she needs to, but back then she could not fake it. You knew if she didn't. I knew. So she didn't like all my friends in college, and I knew that she didn't like them. She couldn't hide that. She was absolutely genuine. I think that helps. She started from a place of naturally being angled towards presence by being herself all the time. But then I think really it's work that she is incredibly interested and engaged in, the work of being present. It is kind of the thing that guides her passion. So she's reading books, and she either meditates or does yoga every day, or sometimes in the morning and the night. And she's really followed that. So she's a Montessori teacher for young children, and I think being with children is good practice in that, but it also necessitates the skill in that, because you are not very effective working with kids if you're not able to be present with them. So I think she started in that direction, and then she has put in a lot of work to get further down that road.
I hear in there, in your example with Rachel, that there was a native skill of emotional self-awareness. Like, I know how I feel most of the time or often. And then there's the work of how do I harness that? And as somebody who I spend a lot of my time trying to learn and understand more about emotional intelligence, and I teach those skills sometimes in different settings. And we can build all those skills, and then it's also the balancing and the harnessing of those, so that we can both know how we're feeling and meter out in the appropriate measures for the setting. I imagine if, in college, she just walked into a room with you and your friends and started naming how she felt about all of your friends, it may not have gone so well.
Yeah, no, and she would never do that. Yeah, and I think she started from maybe, well, no, yeah, I guess you're right. She really was always aware of what she was feeling. It was interesting because back then she was acting. She doesn't act so much anymore, but we were both theater majors. So that's an interesting kind of cross section of her being fully genuine and not being able to hide something she's feeling, but then also taking on characters. And of course, in order for that to work, she had to find a way into the character that was genuine and felt like herself in order for it to come through as honest.
Hmm. And as our listeners already know from the intro, you and I met through improv comedy, and you've been one of my teachers. You're the director of my troupe. And one of the things that you have taught me all along the way, I've heard you say this so many times, it's like a soundtrack in my head, is to remember my emotional point of view as I'm coming in as a character, and that's one of the most powerful things that we can do to create an interesting scene and a fun show for the audience. I'm curious for you, because you're another guy who's grown up in this society. Was emotional point of view always an easy thing for you to tap into, or was that a skill that you built?
It's on stage during improv. It's a little different. You're making a choice, so you're coming in with a choice of an emotional point of view, and then often what I'm saying to you or other performers is to stick with it, because as soon as you shift without reason that we can see, then it's hard for the audience to know who you are and to sort of insert themselves into the scene and relate to it. And that is very easy for me. Real life is a little harder. Improv is easy because I get to choose, and then I just have to stick to my choice. So being consistent, I don't need to know necessarily why I made that choice. I just get to find fun ways to continue playing with the choice that I made. And real life is different. I think real emotions can shift on a dime.
We don't always get to choose our emotions.
No, and they're not always consistent. And often you experience a sudden change of emotion in real life. I think it's sudden and unexplainable, and that's hard to deal with in the moment. So it's a little different in improv. It's a choice. I think in real life, I've often had a harder time answering the question like, how are you doing, or how are you feeling right now? I think my answer is always fine, and I think often I'm a pretty even keeled, on the optimistic side person, but it's harder for me to tap into my real emotions, and that's gotten easier as I've gotten older. But it was certainly not something that I had access to when I was younger, and they would sort of build up and then surprise me in it at some point when I didn't expect them.
Hmm. I'm curious if you've had the same experience that I have actually around this construct of emotions that we play with in an improv scene, where we decide that I'm going to be the frustrated customer, and that's a fun thing to play with. And as you pointed out many times, including on the show, stay with being the frustrated customer. Don't then switch to the one who's joyful. But has that constructed emotional reality, practicing that, has that been part of helping you in your day-to-day non-improv life recognize what emotions you have?
Mm, no, I do not think so. And maybe I'm missing it. This is the first time I guess I've really thought about it, but it feels like a very different skill set. That the that in real life, the question is how are you actually feeling, and then having I guess the awareness to know, and then the courage to sort of say it honestly. I'm also sort of a people pleaser, and very conflict averse. So I'm unlikely to tell someone how I actually feel if I predict that will cause them discomfort.
Yeah. I think what you described is how that practice of improv has helped me with my everyday emotional intelligence abilities. It's forced me to expand my vocabulary and what it looks like and what it feels like to be in the emotion, even if it's constructed, which then gives me more range and flexibility and some courage, because even though the stakes are incredibly low on the stage, I still got to play with being angry, which is also one of my more challenging emotions. I got to see that, oh, I know how to actually channel this. Bringing it into the real world is certainly still a work in progress.
Yeah, that's a great point. You get to try it out a little bit, and I think that's at its origins. I think that's why people enjoy going to theaters, so they get to watch and experience intense emotions when there's actually no stakes, and it's a bit of an outlet to see. Yeah, to see someone playing anger for sure. Yeah, same. I'm very aware that I'm a man and that I'm tall, and anger feels, it feels scary. And I think part of that was that my dad was tall as well and a man, and definitely had a lot of moments of anger in my childhood. And so I think that's part of why I'm cautious around it. But you're right, playing it on stage, even for comedic effect, does feel like a little bit of a practice. Yeah.
Mm. I'm also just thinking in the moment about how in that setting, and in the setting I'm thinking of is the improv theater. There's a stage and there's a handful of performers up there, and there's a few dozen people or more out in the audience sitting there observing, but they're sharing the same space and they're interacting in certain ways. And that could also happen in settings in the workplace, right? In a meeting or a presentation or something like that, where that you have that same kind of model. And I'm just thinking about what's the interplay for audience and presenter, let's call it in this case, to make it a little more generic. The person on the stage and the people who are watching, like how does intimacy happen there? What's the exchange? You can take that from the improv context if you want. I know you've spent lots of time on stages.
It does go back to that idea of presence. I mean, I think one of the reasons that improv feels so special is that the show it feels like it belongs equally to the performers and to the audience, the people who are in the room, which is not quite the same as you could say with a scripted theatrical show, or even someone showing up and giving a keynote speech that they've given at 73 other locations. You have experienced it as an audience member, but they've brought something to you to give to you. And improv it exists only for this show. That's the first and last time it's ever going to happen. We all walk into the room together, performers and audience alike, and we don't know what's going to happen next. And then we discover it together, and that's the audience is involved, not just in giving a suggestion or ideas to bounce off of, or in the show that you do, you take a text message, a recent text message from an audience member and use that as inspiration. So the audience is literally inspiring and part of the show. But there's such a give and take between the audience and the performers, which happens in theater too, except if I'm acting in a play, I can bounce off the energy that I'm getting from the audience, but I still know what path I'm going to follow. I might move in a slightly different way at a different speed with a different intensity based on what I'm getting from the audience, but I'm going to be walking the same road. And in improv, when the audience has a reaction that I didn't expect, it absolutely alters the path of the show moving forward. I mean, we're really all a part of it, and we're all, if it's a good show, we're all absolutely present in it from moment to moment. And when the show ends, it feels like we've all just had this moment where ideally all of the other things that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that pull you out of presence, all those things have been put aside for an hour, and we've all experienced something and created something together, and then it's gone, which is what presence is as well. You don't walk out of a present moment with something tangible. It was by definition just in that moment, and now it's gone, which is special. You know, people always ask about recording shows so that they can watch later, or they can watch a show that they missed. And then, no, it's not the same. You would see something that we made, but it would be lifeless. It would be like a stuffed bird or something instead of a real bird.
I've still never watched the recording of the show that we did for Not in Charge, that we submitted for a festival. I watched like the first 5 minutes and I'm like, nah.
Yeah. Even a really good show, it can be entertaining to watch, but it's just not the same because it's not the intended product. You know, it's not the medium that it's meant for.
I just want to underscore that this is happening everywhere all the time too. When people buy a ticket to come see an improv show, that's part of the contract. They're expecting I get to just show up and be present to this creative thing that we don't know where the story is going to go, and whether they know it or not, their energy and their influence is going to change how that story evolves. And that happens every day. A lot of times I'm talking about, leadership and business and this podcast. And that's happening in every meeting that you have pretty much, and being present to how are people reacting, and then adjusting and pivoting and stopping and maybe changing the agenda. I think it's one of the big lessons that I continue to try to take away from my fun on the stage practice play of improv into, okay, I'm doing work that feels higher stakes, arguably is, in the working world. So thank you. That response really touches a lot of notes for me.
Oh, absolutely.
I want to come back to something else you said about presence and the role that kids play in presence, like this unvarnished presence that they seem to have. And I want to pivot a little bit to parenting, because I know from your story that you and your family parent in a little bit of a non-traditional way, or a more an evolving way. And I'd just love to hear about some of your experience of how parenting has shifted in your family, or whether it's over generations or just within your nuclear family.
Yeah, I had an interesting parenting experience as a child. So when I was, for the first half of my childhood, up until sixth grade, so what is that, maybe 12 years old in sixth grade, something like that. We were very traditional. So my mom stayed home with me and my three siblings. I'm the third out of four. And she took care of us. That was her full time job. And my dad was a high earning regional manager for department stores like Macy's. And he would work like 90 hours a week. So
Mm.
he would be already out of the house when we woke up in the morning. And then sometimes he would get home or as we were going to sleep, and he would say goodnight. And some nights he wouldn't get home in time to say goodnight. And that was, I mean, the weekends too. I mean, pretty much we would plan these big family vacations every year, and that was when he would put aside time to spend with us. But because of that limited amount of time, his role as a parent was fun, wild dad on vacations,
Uh-huh.
and then disciplinarian when my mom needed to call in the big guns. And that
Wait
was
till
it.
your father gets home.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And then it all shifted. I mean, it's hard to say. Well, it doesn't matter. I guess we should turn off I should turn off my inner judge about saying whether something is good or bad, because it doesn't, not connected to anything. But he had this he had gotten in a car accident years before and had surgery, and they put a surgical disc into his spinal cord, and then he was, after some rehabilitation, he was pretty much back to normal and working his very busy schedule. That was years earlier when I was very young. When I was in sixth grade, we went on a vacation. One of the vacations I mentioned, we were in New Jersey. We had stayed at a hotel and we were heading out to Six Flags for the day. We got in the hotel, the elevator in the hotel. We were up on the sixth floor, and the elevator started going down. And then suddenly the lights turned out. The elevator dropped two floors, and then the emergency brakes slammed on, and the emergency lights came on. And we were all shaken, but fine. And then we started walking. We talked to whatever. We got out. They let us out of the elevator. We talked. Everybody was fine. We started walking out to the car in the parking lot to continue our day. And my dad was moving slower and slower and slower. And we realized that the surgical disc had shattered in this slamming of the brakes, and it kind of splintered in his nervous system, which is obviously a completely life altering thing that happened, as we learned over the next days and weeks. So eventually what that led to was my mom getting a job and going out and working full time, and my dad staying home, mostly in bed, but now taking over the parenting role for four kids. I guess I was in sixth grade, so I had two older brothers who at this point would have been in 10th grade and 12th grade. So, and then my sister was younger. She was 2 years younger than me. So he had to switch into the main parent role, and he had to like learn how to cook and learn when we needed to be picked up from all of our extracurricular things. I mean, it was obviously enormous, and it was hard for a while, but through that, he found his way through, and certainly found his way to a much more intimate relationship with his kids than he would have had otherwise. It's hard for me to imagine what my relationship with my dad would be like now if he had continued working that schedule all the way till I left home for college.
Yeah, the emotional labor of parenting happens in those really small moments of a kid not wanting to go to the doctor. And you've made that appointment and you're bringing them to the doctor. And in the traditional model of American society, it's the mom who's dealing with that.
Yeah.
And to move into that must have forced him to learn a ton of new skills. But I love that for you and for him, that it fostered this new level of intimacy of like, hey, we get to know each other in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting, that has shifted. Luckily, I'm not when I'm out with my kids, out and about, taking them to the doctor or whatever. I'm not the only dad who's doing it. I still see more moms than dads, but
Sure.
that has shifted. There's like a positive bias to it now, which is interesting. I feel like I get more credit for everything.
Yeah.
People think we're so cute. They're more likely to come up and say how well behaved my kid is, or how nice it is to see us out, or say hi or something, because they are, I guess, pleasantly surprised to see a dad on that level of parenting. So it makes me feel a little guilty, but nice, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know that we need extra credit for stepping up that way. And I get where it comes from.
Hey guys, it's Jim. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're enjoying these episodes and are wanting to bring a little bit more of those relational skills into your work and your life, get in touch. I keep a couple of slots open for one-on-one coaching with guys to help them develop their emotional intelligence, their relationship skills, their leadership ability, all so that they could live the most successful and happy lives possible. Just email me at jim@thecenteredcoach.com and we can have a short call to see how I might be able to help you.
I wonder for you, because I know how involved and engaged of a dad you are, what intimacy is like with your kids.
Oh, it's a challenge. It really is. I think if we are not making conscious choices about it, making the presence, again, like, does not come naturally to adults, and it certainly doesn't come naturally to me. I think it's part of the reason why I got so interested in improv in the first place was because it was a place where I stepped into and immediately found presence, and it was something that I felt like I was excelling at. And I have a hard time being present in other parts of my life. I think I have very strong escapist tendencies into my phone, into TV, into video games, into a book. Anything. I think I do kind of flee into that stuff because the present can be sort of uncomfortable, or not even uncomfortable, but it just takes effort. So for me, it is constant work, day in and day out. And whenever I'm with my kids, I'm trying to be present, and I'm often failing, but trying again and again. And they help me get back into it, because like right now I have my younger son is 3 and he's potty training. And if I'm not present, like, he's going to pee his pants.
Yeah.
so I often come back into presence with a puddle on the floor, and I go, oh yeah. And I was looking at my phone for a second there, and I was not keyed into what he was doing and what was happening. So they're often helping in that way. My older one is almost 8, and she's more vocal about it. She just demands the attention when she wants it, when she needs it. It's lovely and it's hard. And when people hear the ages of my kids, they often say, "Oh, you're in it." Parents of older kids say, "You're in it right now," and it really is. It's like every moment of the day, someone's got to be on them, with them, planning what's next for them, and then when Rachel and I put them to bed at night, it's like, oh, they're asleep, and there's this weird calm that descends, like, oh, we could both do things now. Both of us could do things now.
Including be present with each other.
That's right.
Which maybe if you've been present all day to make sure there aren't any pee puddles, that it makes it a little harder.
It definitely does. It's so true. And she's, that's usually if it's been a long day of work and being with the kids, and I get to the nighttime, that I really do have the need to escape to what did you call it earlier? To power introvert.
Yeah, power introvert nights. Yeah,
I do that a lot. I feel like I need that time. I discovered the need for that time during the lockdown with COVID, that I really need alone time to recharge. And Yeah. So sometimes it is harder to make the choice at night to be present with Rachel. She needs it too. She's better than I am, but she'll often be doing yoga or something, and that's part of her recharge time. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she's always present for me if I make the connection, but I don't always do it.
Uh-huh. Thank you first for not sugarcoating how it is to create intimate space with your kids, because it sounds all nice and, oh, we played and we were really engaged, and it's also work. It goes side by side, that it's work to be present, it's work to create intimacy, and the rewards of that are, well, I have my own interpretation of the rewards. What are some of the rewards that you get when you are present with your kids?
Well, just I think being present is a really good practice. I think it improves your life and improves all of your relationships.
Mhm.
So the more you do it, it's sort of like planking. The more you do it, the more you do it, the better you get at it, the longer you can stay in it with less effort and you make it more easeful, but you have to keep working at it. So I think the first thing is like I just get practice being present because they sort of demand it. I think adults with adult relationships, if you're not present, they just will stop calling you and they'll just disappear. But that's not an option with your kids. Your kids, they want you, they need you, they know they need you, and they're like not polite about it. They they demand it.
And that risk is real, that in adulthood, that relationship might just wither, might go away. And I hear a lot, there's a lot of studies out around. The Surgeon General this year released a study on isolation and loneliness as a critical issue in our society. And I think a lot of it comes back to not being present, going into these distracting, whether it's a device or something else. There's all these ways to avoid the discomfort of presence and maintaining connection. And it's
Yeah.
huge, huge
Yeah,
topic.
there's a million ways to do that, to escape, which I'm connected to a lot of them. And I love them. I am sort of like a media junkie. I really enjoy all of that. But yeah, finding balance and it's like anything it feels really good to have a lot of different experiences and things to be engaged with because it makes you leave the things that you are naturally drawn to, and then when you come back you have new stuff. That's certainly true with improv. I've known people who have gotten into improv and then have really tried to spend just about every waking hour that they can reading it, watching it, studying it, learning it, performing it, and you begin to like almost literally do scenes about improvising, which is not entertaining for anybody.
Right.
You need to have like other stuff going on and then bring it into what you're doing. So yeah, I find that a lot that it's good to have kids, which forces me to be present and to be with people and to go out and do things. And then when I come home to read my book, I discover, oh, that's so weird. I really relate to this thing the character's going through. This is just like what I did yesterday, which is a much more fulfilling experience than reading a book and being reminded of another book that you read, you know?
Yeah. A book about books.
Right.
I want to come back to something else you said, because I know we have another commonality here. You said that at the end of the night, that you may not be the one who brings presents forward to your wife, that she may be more likely to do that. And I want to jump over to a different type of relationship, which is friendships. And you've commented to me in the past that you found it easier to establish friendships with women than men. And that's been true for me as well throughout much of my life. I'm curious what has made it easier for you over time to connect with women as friends, and what's the role of that kind of friendship with women in your life?
Imagine that it's toxic masculinity, although I guess I never really identified it as that. But when I was, I guess it was right around when I moved. I think when I was, so I grew up in California, in Northern California, and we moved when I was 7 or 8. Um, and before that, I think I was friends with boys and girls. And then we moved out here, and I was in second grade. And for whatever reason, I really picked up the clear message based on the culture there when I moved to Massachusetts that I was really only supposed to be friends with boys. I couldn't be close friends with girls. And girls did not reach out to be close friends with me when I moved out here. So I ended up with this group of boy friends. And as we grew from second grade up through elementary school and middle school, the culture of that friendship was, I mean, it was the only real friendships that I had. So I wasn't questioning it at that time, but it was like we would play video games together and watch cartoons and movies, and we would make fun of each other. We were either focused on a third thing, like a video game or something, or we were sort of ragging on each other or collectively ragging on something or someone else. And it's funny for me to think of this now, but like the most common pastime that we had was trying to surprise each other by hitting each other in the nuts.
Uh-huh.
That was a huge part of our friendship, was unexpectedly hitting someone else in the nuts.
Did you refer to it as tagging someone? Because I feel like I played that game.
I think that term came later. I thought tagging, maybe I'm wrong, or tapping. I think we just called them nut shots. I mean, that was our friendship. And it was really all I knew. Yeah. And then, my older brothers had done a little bit of theater. And when I was little, I had done one community theater show and I loved it. I really liked performing. It was like an outlet for me. I think otherwise I was a pretty shy kid. I still am, but getting on stage was sort of a safe place to be bigger and to take attention. And so when I got to high school, I got really involved with the drama club at my high school. Luckily, my high school had I think they still do have a really good theater program. And so I went in, that's where I started spending after school every day. It was in rehearsals and singing in chorus. I was like doing both of those things. And that was, of course, almost entirely women. There were a few guys, but I was one of only two guys in my grade who were doing that. And so suddenly I had this place to be safely friends with girls. And the relationships that I found through drama club, again, almost entirely with girls, I was myself. I was actually able to be myself, to talk about the things that I wanted to talk about, to express feelings as they occurred, to be positive, to just be wholesome and positive, and to not feel like I was constantly guarding my balls.
Yeah.
That's
That must have been a relief.
Yeah, literally and figuratively, I think. Like
Right.
always bracing for the shot to come out of somewhere.
Oh, that's profound. Because I've immediately went to literally, but of course it's figuratively, right? It's like, I got to defend my burgeoning manhood in front of these other boys who are doing the same thing in this kind of fucked up, fearful way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it felt so freeing. And I guess I was probably 13 or 14. I was so aware of the change. It was so drastic that I wasn't quite able or willing to sort of say to my male friends, no, I'm not interested in spending time with you anymore. I couldn't quite do that. But I did really just spend most of my time with my new friend group and sort of begrudgingly did the things with my guy friends when I needed to, or it felt like I had to. But over the course of high school, I really did pull away until graduation. I don't think, I wasn't sitting near them, or it would just, we had really, really drifted in a way that was so relieving to me. And so that continued. I've always felt more comfortable with I guess female presenting friends. Those have always been my closest friends, have been women.
And today, what makes it challenging still to create, strike up, build friendships with people on the male end of the spectrum?
It's hard to put my finger on is it something that I'm actually receiving, or is it something that I'm assuming that I will receive in response? I'm not sure. I have some male friends now, and I'm still close friends with a couple men from college and after college, but they do tend to be on a similar level as me, more, less I guess guarded, generally not super into sports, which maybe there's something cultural there that comes along with
Certainly the competitive, be bigger than notion would show up there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess my close guy friends now are also interested in artistic pursuits, whether that's performing or visual arts or music, that kind of more, I guess, more expressive stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. There's one other question I want to get to, and I think I can find a way into it from that last conversation. 'Cause you mentioned that it was hard for you as you started to make that shift and tell your guy friends in high school, hey, I'm not going to hang out with you as much. It sounds like it was more like an organic drift away from those relationships. And one of the things that I get to really practice with you as director of my troupe is receiving feedback. And you've gotten, I think, very adept at giving feedback. And I'm sure in your theater career, you've also had the practice of having to receive feedback. And I'm just curious what role you think that plays as we're trying to shape these relationships to provide honest feedback and find ways to receive it gracefully.
This it might be similar to my answer before. It feels a little bit like different skill sets. I'm sure there's a connection that I'm missing, but I'll say if I'm giving feedback to Rachel, to my romantic partner, my first priority is to be honest and to tell her exactly what I'm feeling, and then if that brings up feelings in her, then we'll deal with that as well. But I want to be honest first and foremost. If I'm giving feedback to a performer in a team that I'm coaching, it's a little bit more. This is gonna sound negative, but it's a little more manipulative. It's not necessarily worthwhile for me to give that person the entire truth of what I'm seeing. Partially because it's just what I'm seeing, and my role in the performance is not as important as theirs, especially in improv. We're not rehearsing a specific moment. We're trying to build a skill and an approach for whatever moment comes up in the actual show. So when I'm giving feedback to a performer, I'm giving it to them with the end result in mind. I'm thinking, how are they going to respond to this, or how can I get them to see this in the way that I am hoping that they will see it? How can I get them to come to this on their own? And so it's a little bit more like first gauging their response and what I know about them, and then presenting it in the way that I think will get them to where I want them to go. Which, if I did that with Rachel, that feels very underhanded and strange or sort of gross.
Yeah. Because in the improv setting, it's a developmental nudge that you're giving of, I know there's somewhere you could take this particular thing we're working on. So I'm gonna, as a guide, I can do that when we get into the pure relational peer-to-peer realm. I 100% agree. That's not, that is manipulative, and that's trying to perhaps control the other person. And I think there's awareness. Maybe if we, we kind of circle it all the way back, there's presence in that process of, what's the relationship that I'm in? What do I want to share that will forward this relationship based on the type that it is? Is it more prescriptive guidance, or is it some honest emotional feedback with a willingness to then have the exchange? I guess having the exchange in both places is great. So yeah, I see a connection there, as you described that. So thank you for playing that one with me.
Yeah, it feels like two different kinds. I guess the feedback I give as a coach or as a director is similar to the way would try to give feedback to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because with kids, you have to be careful. They're sometimes everything you say has extra weight and goes a lot farther than you intend. So just little things like I've learned that it's if your kid is doing something problematic or that's challenging or troubling, you want to be careful in your feedback to be targeting the action, the thing that they are doing, rather than them as a person. Because if you tell them they are annoying, they're going to take that into part of who they are. They're going to take that moving forward. That's a word that describes them, their core. But if you saying beep, 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 beep 1,000 times in a row is annoying. I'm feeling annoyed by that. Then that's a little bit, you're being a little bit more thoughtful about the way that you're delivering it to them, so that it's more helpful and less damaging, I guess.
Yeah, I will be watching for that in notes after our next show, by the way. appreciate that little bit of inside.
Yeah, a little less beeping, Jim. A little less beeping would be nice.
All next show, that's all I'm going to do is just go on stage and beep, 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 beep.
Oh, can't wait.
Well, Scott, thank you for the explorations today. I'd love to just, give you a moment to, if there's anything else that you thought of or anything else that you just want to share about what's going on in the world that you want folks to know about.
Maybe one last thing. I remember just this moment. It's always stuck with me. I had just learned to drive, and I was driving a car with my dad in the passenger seat. Maybe I had my learner's permit, so he had to be in the passenger seat. I can't remember. No, it must have been a little later, because I think I was about to graduate high school, and my girlfriend, who I'd been dating for over a year, and I was going off to college. She was going into her senior year of high school, and so we had decided to break up. We weren't going to try to do a long distance thing. And I was telling my dad about it. My dad, who at this point had been home with me for 6 years as the primary parent, just as a measure of the intimacy that we had found over that time, I guess. I was driving and I started crying, talking about how I was going to be ending this relationship with my girlfriend. And I remember it's so sweet. He was so caring and being there with me, not offering a lot of advice or anything, not trying to fix it, just being there, being present with my emotion. And he was so worried about having a brand new driver who was driving the car with tears in his eyes. And I remember him asking very, very quietly and politely, "Would you like to pull over?" And I said, "No, I'm fine. I'm fine," wiping tears out of my eyes. It's just just a sweet moment that I remember as an example of the intimacy that we found, and really an amazing moment for my dad, who, as I mentioned, was a really type A kind of career-driven guy and always had the answer and the solution and the fix for things. And in this moment, he sort of knew that there was no fix, or that the suggestion of a fix wouldn't be helpful. Just a nice moment.
I love that. It's never too late to dive into intimacy as a way to deepen connection. And I'd love to ask your dad about that story sometime. Maybe next time he's at a show, I'll what was going through your head?
I've never asked him about it. I'm sure he remembers it. I've never asked him. Yeah.
Scott, what would you love for folks to know about the work that you're doing in the world?
Oh, yeah. I'm the artistic director of Happier Valley Comedy, which is a nonprofit improv comedy theater in Western Massachusetts. And it's a very unique blend, I think, of what we do. And our mission is it's an interesting intersection of just an improv comedy theater and sort of a social justice, wellness-minded mission. We are trying to make the world a better place in lots of different ways, using the principles of improvisation, some of which we've talked about here in this conversation. So we have shows every Saturday. I think Jim plays in the third Saturday of every month. If you want to come see him on stage, we're in Hadley, Massachusetts. We've got classes. We do professional development. You can find out about everything at happiervalley.com.
And we'll drop that link in the show notes. Scott, thank you so much for being on the show and exploring how we can expand our intimacy today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I really look forward to seeing you next week on Expansive Intimacy with me, Jim Young. I'd also love your help with expanding intimacy even further. Will you take a minute right now to rate the show and write a review? It's the best way for us to bring more people into the conversation. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.